Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the District 8 City Council Forum. My name is Jeff Horsfall. I'm the president of Central Park United Neighbors. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Central Park United Neighbors is the registered neighborhood organization for the Central Park community. We are an all-volunteer board of residents and a registered 501c3. If you're not familiar with our organization, we're really about building community here in Central Park. And we do that in two really important ways. One is on creating forums of discussion on topics that are important to our residents. And two is opportunities to connect and engage through programming and other kinds of events. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do as a board, you're always welcome to visit centralparkunitedneighbors.com. We have monthly board meetings that are open to the public on the third Tuesday of every month, and a couple of unique opportunities that we have coming up if you're particularly interested. One is we have our annual forum coming up on Tuesday, May 16th at 6:30 p.m. It will be here in the We'll be joined by Councilman Herndon, by Auditor Tim O'Brien, a number of other guest speakers, and we'll also be giving our residents their chance to vote on a slate of board members who will represent Central Park on this board for a 2-year term. So you have to be in person or online to vote, so be sure to attend. Another thing I want to point out is we have a first annual Central Park Classic Mini Golf Tournament. May 21st. We've got staggered start times at noon, 2, and 4. It's a fundraiser for our organization to help us keep up our work. So hope you'll take a look at the events page on our website and consider joining us on the 21st. A few people I want to thank. First, I really want to thank the forum committee that was involved in organizing this event this evening. That includes Mark Maringer, who's right here, Liz Hogan-Stallnicker, there's Liz, and then Mandel Rousseau, who's unable to join, but just a tremendous amount of effort has gone into coordinating and planning this, and I want to thank all of them. I also want to thank the Foundation for Sustainable Urban Communities and Brian Weber in particular, who's just been a huge champion of our organization, supporter of these events. Throughout the primary and election season here in Denver. I want to thank the MCA for hosting us, especially Lawrence. I don't know where Lawrence went, but he's the one that made this amazing set. You look like I might know what I'm talking about as I do this over here. So thank you to Lawrence. We have a number of people not only in attendance here, but also watching live via Zoom. So hello to everyone that's watching virtually. And I encourage you to share the recording of this, which will go out on our YouTube page in the next couple of days for any of your friends or neighbors who might be interested in catching up on the event after missing the evening. So with that, the last thing I want to do is thank my daughters who are here quietly, however begrudgingly, due to a logistical complication. Nora and Cecilia, I hope you learn a little something about the importance of public service. Sound good? Well, and with that, I want to thank Brad Bear and Chantel Lewis, our candidates. Let's give them a quick round. The format for the night, which they are well aware of, and I'll just kind of run through with all of you, is we're going to have a kind of a moderated Q&A until about 7 o'clock or so. And each candidate will have an allotted time of 1 to 2 minutes for prepared remarks. And a timer is visible to both of them so that they have a good sense of how much time is remaining. You'll hear from Ms. Lewis first in those opening remarks. I'm then going to ask a series of prepared questions depending on how much time we have, the number of questions that will get asked. We'll alternate between who gets to answer those questions first, and they'll have 1 or 2 minutes to answer the question depending on the question. And we'll make that clear to both candidates when they're asked. Candidates have not been given these questions in advance. They're hearing them for the first time, and they were made up by that forum committee that I mentioned, and with input from the community, we put out a survey on the kinds of things they wanted to hear us asking about. Then we'll wrap things up with a conclusion of 2 minutes apiece. Mr. Rivera will go first in that instance. And then the remaining time is yours. We'll have 30 minutes for kind of meet and greet. You can go ask the candidates your questions. You can share your thoughts on what's important in District 8 and wrap up the evening from there. So one last detail that I always want to make sure people are clear on in the interest of transparency is that Brad Rivera is a sitting CPUN board member, but he has had no advance knowledge of any of the inner workings of the event. He has no advance notice of the questions, and everything here that's happening is fully above. And that was a lot of me talking. You want to hear about them talking, so let's get to that. I'm going to sit in my comfy chair and let Ms. Lewis, you're welcome to start with your 2 minutes of preparing. Oh, sorry, I just hit that power button. Yeah, very good. Oh, would you, as you like.
I'm not sure. It's down.
Yeah.
That's hard for people who are really short, like myself. So hi, my name is Shanta Lewis, a candidate for Denver City Council's District 8. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. I wanted to tell you a bit about myself. I actually grew up in Denver, Colorado. I grew up in 5 Points. I grew up around the time of busing. I grew up to a mom who had 6 of us, and so I was kind of responsible for the siblings. I was responsible for getting them up in the mornings, breakfast, and off to school. And sometimes I was irresponsible, so I didn't wake my siblings up in the morning, and so we didn't go to school if we didn't have the money to get on the public bus or if our neighbor wasn't around. So at a very, very young age, I became aware of what it meant to provide access, and oftentimes what barriers existed to that access. Excuse me. And it really carried that lens from my middle school to my high school, even into my college years. I was a young mom. I attended Manual High School right down the street here. And so was dependent on public transportation as a young mom in high school and also going into college. And so remembering those really long bus rides and the sacrifice I needed to take in terms of like my hourly wage to be able to make a living for my family or for my son, and was unfortunately thrust into being unhoused because my fiance at the time and my high school sweetheart was killed in a car accident. And so I had the opportunity to really move from someone who was unhoused to then having the opportunity to access an affordable housing unit and eventually funds to purchase my first home. And I'm most proud that I was able to be the VP at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, so moving from being unhoused to then leading our homelessness initiatives within the city and county of Denver, or actually within the state. Furthermore, I had the opportunity to move from being a student at Denver Public Schools to then leading as a director, leading all of our family and community engagement efforts, so over 200 schools that I was responsible for. And then finally, in being transit dependent, I worked for the Regional Transportation District, RTD, and then ended up serving on the board for the Regional Transportation District. And so I believe the time is right for that kind of blended experience for large organizations to be able to make a difference on Denver City Council. So thank you so much for your time.
Everybody here? Hi, everyone. My name is Brad Rivera, and I'm running for Denver City Council District 8. I like to say again, because we have a runoff today.
Yeah.
I live here in Central Park with my family. My wife is here with us today and our 2 little girls. And I'm just so happy to be able to talk to you all again. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. So I quit my corporate job to work on some of our city's toughest problems. And the one I'm most proud of is that I brought together people and resources to tackle something about youth opportunity. So I brought together Denver Public Schools, families, students, and then our business community to create a youth apprenticeship system here in Denver. And it's paid job training opportunities where young people can launch their college and career hopes and dreams. And since then, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of young people across the city and across the state who've been able to take advantage of that. I've also served as the executive director of a partnership with the city and county of Denver, where I work directly with top department heads around innovative solutions to problems around climate change and serving the unhoused. And I have also, in my professional career, worked with both of the mayoral candidates that are here in the runoff as well, Kelly Brough and Mike Johnston, in different capacities. So I mention all this because as you think about, who you're voting for and this election in general, I believe I can hit the ground running and serving District 8 and making sure that we're bringing together people, resources, collaboration, and everything we need to do to solve our toughest problems. And then the last thing I'll just mention is I know we're going to talk about a lot of topics here tonight. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the questions that were put together by this group. And I also look forward over the next month, the next sprint of 4 weeks we kind of have here before everybody votes, to hearing your thoughts and issues on these as well. So thank you. And again, I'm Brad Rivera, running City Council District 8.
Brad, you'll have the first crack at this question, and you'll have 2 minutes to respond. As you mentioned, you were both here as part of a runoff, right? And in round one, Ms. Lewis, you received roughly 36% of the vote, Mr. Rivera, 34%, but that leaves about 30% of votes that did not go to either of you. And hopefully a whole lot of new voters are participating this time too. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel you offer to a voter who perhaps wanted to see somebody else on this stage here tonight?
Well, I'll sort of start in saying that I think everybody had a lot of different choices for a lot of different offices this first time around. And so for me, what I've been doing is as I go out and knock on doors and call voters and everything like that, I'm reintroducing myself. Because again, I think the way I would sort of frame it, it's not roughly right in terms of the math, but let's say a third of the voters voted for me, a third voted for Chantel, and a third voted for someone else. And I think what we've got to do, and what I'm doing is reintroduce myself to voters and asking, what are those issues that are most important to you? I think there were some issues on the last ballot that have since been decided and the will of the voters has spoken. And so now it's a chance to say, what are the other issues that are most important to you? What do we do for the future here in our city? And what are those issues in District 8 that are most important to you? So long story short, I think the way I'm sort of framing this is I'm reaching out to everybody. We're going to be in every corner of this district and have been, and really just talking about what are those issues and what's important to you in terms of making this final decision on who represents you for District 8 City Council.
I feel like that's probably a question for folks at the door to ask them what I offer differently than the candidates that were in the race. But quite frankly, I think my experience you know, there was a lot of discussion, and many of you have heard me speak this, and if this is not the first time you've heard me speak, is that a lot of the discussion pre-runoff was around the Park Hill Golf Course and 2-0. And because the discussion was so heavy on the 2-0, I don't think we really got a chance to really drill down into like what were the differences and or similarities between candidates. The issue, the focus really became on a single issue. And I think one of the opportunities we have is to really be more expansive in how we have conversations about what are happening, what's happening within our communities from a housing perspective, from a transit perspective, from a climate perspective, criminal justice perspective. And I think that what I offer to voters is an expertise in each one of those, and a willingness to learn in the areas in which I don't have an expertise, and a desire to co-govern with each of you. I have no desire whatsoever to hold this office alone. I genuinely hope that when I am elected, that each one of you are working in partnership with me to come up with the best solutions. And I think that's a unique perspective. I have no interest in pontificating and creating solutions out of thin air. And I think that's what I offer to the voters, and they know that they see that, they feel that genuineness coming off of me, and that genuine desire to work in partnership with each of you. I mean, I think that's what you want in your next city councilor, someone who's willing to work in partnership and in tandem, and not someone who's not willing to work in the messy middle. And I've said several times that I have a commitment to the messy middle, and that's a commitment to the voters within the entire district and the entire city and county.
Thank you both. So the next two questions arose out of themes that were raised by our residents when we asked them what they wanted to hear about. Those two questions are: one, crime, and two, traffic safety. And the first question is going to be about crime, and it will go to Ms. Lewis first. 2 minutes for your response. Crime is on the rise across District 8 and the city at large. I'm wondering how you would advocate that the city of Denver address this recent rising crime from your seat on city council.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. So I have had the opportunity to do gang reduction work within the city and county of Denver. And if you're not familiar with gang reduction work, it's an opportunity to work with youth that are involved in gangs and to find opportunities, pro-social activities to get them out of those gangs, or maybe to minimize their exposure or their time that they spend in their gangs. And what I learned during my time there is every single time, the single thing that would come up every single time when I would talk to my students who were gang involved was, Miss Blue, if you give us a job, if you give us opportunities, we'll stay out of trouble. Now, there was another side of that you have to actually keep the job in order to stay out of trouble, but that was like a different part of the conversation. And that's no different now. Like when we talk about crime, we talk about safety, I think it's important for us to recognize the interconnectedness of the issue. We can't silo these issues when it comes to housing. We can't silo the issues when it comes to transportation. We can't silo the issues when it comes to climate. Like, these are all intertwined. And when you fix something within a community or community members, and you're not thinking of the gamut of opportunities within that community, then you've missed an opportunity to really serve the entire the whole of that individual and that community. So I truly believe in investing in our greatest asset. And in my opinion, our greatest asset are each one of you, our people. And you do that by putting forward programs such as the internship program that Brad has mentioned, putting forward the summer employment program, which I'm a product of, and I strongly as an opportunity to give folks, youth more specifically, an opportunity is funding more of those programs. You figure out how do you lower, or how do you deal with the red tape when it comes to funding community based organizations who serve these populations, to give them those economic opportunities that I'm discussing. So I think there are a number of ways in which you can address crime without just thinking about how do you increase the police presence in communities, but how do you deal with crime safety more holistically.
Thank you. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here. I agree with a lot of what Chantel said about if we can help people meet their basic needs, if we can invest in job training, it's really giving people opportunity and hopes for the future, and meet those basic needs around housing. Like, that's going to make a difference. The only thing I'd add is over the past couple of months, I've been going to a lot of we have two different police districts. We have Police District 5, which covers Central Park and Montello. And then we have Police District 2, which covers Park Hill and East Colfax. And when I go to these, they have these, cab conversations, so really community meetings between the police and the community. I really thought, like, this is something that we need to do more of, which is foster a lot of these community conversations around what people are seeing out there. Because there is a lot of different categories of crime that keep rising and have been for the past couple of years. And I think people are worried about car theft. They're worried about just other things in the community in different parts. They're worried about hearing gunshots at night. They're worried about, if I call 911, am I going to get a quick response? And if you look at some of those response times for 911, they're going up. And I think for certain categories of calls, what we're seeing is we need to figure out how do we best define what we want the police to respond to, and what do we want co-responders or alternate responders to respond to. So that frees up the resources of our police to really respond to the most urgent and dangerous crimes that happen. And I think what I'll also just mention and end on is I think a lot of these community conversations with, not only our nonprofits, but our police force as well. That's where you can have police that are accountable to the community. And I think if you're upset about car thefts and things like that, these are places where you can have conversations to tell our law enforcement officials what's happening, what are you seeing, and then figure out how to help stop those. So I think if we can figure out how to make sure we define what we want the police to respond to, if we want alternate response models or community-based organizations to work with, we're going to come to a better result.
Thanks. And Brad, you'll go first with the second question, which is also 2-minute response. Speeding and reckless driving are a big issue across the city. I know our residents feel it acutely with half a dozen major thoroughfares here in Central Park. What's your view on the best way to address this from your seat on city council?
Yeah. Well, when I'm elected to District 8, I want to make District 8 the place where we start to pilot a lot of these solutions to curb illegal speeding. From my time co-chairing the Safe Streets Committee here at CPUN and then representing District 8 around safe streets issues to advise the mayor on the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee. The number one issue I heard from people as I was out knocking on doors, just illegal speeding. It's not just in Central Park, it's in East Colfax, it's in Park Hill, it's in Montbello. I think we need to be the place where we say, we want to see speed bumps put in. We want to try out innovative street designs so that we can figure out how to curb illegal speeding. And I would be remiss without mentioning, here in Central Park, two of the most infamous intersections where I see probably a car accident almost every single day are Northfield Boulevard and Central Park Boulevard, and then MLK and Central Park Boulevard as well. We need, and there's actually supposed to be funding allocated towards a speed or safety study for those intersections from the last go bond. We need to really make sure we're looking at unsafe intersections where there are frequent car crashes and to try to figure out how to change the infrastructure on those so that we can stop having all these illegal speedings and all these accidents. Furthermore, what I'd say is I think we need to make sure that we're doing traffic calming in our neighborhoods too. Because a lot of people are very see, and again, here's a call for the district. People are using neighborhood streets to cut through between our higher speed arterial roads, and they're going, this happens on the street, they're going 50 or 60 miles an hour. So I think we need to do more to make sure that our neighborhood streets are safe too, and that we can find ways to calm traffic as well in those areas.
Okay, great. The first, this is a conversation I think we certainly need to be having. We have a Vision Zero plan that we have not actually obtained yet. And so when we talk about speeding and reckless driving, we have an opportunity to assess that the things that we put forward, if we come back and say, did that thing actually work? Are we making strides to making sure that that thing actually works? And I don't, in my opinion, and it's very humble indeed, that we sometimes put these things in place and don't come back to assess if they're actually effective measures and if they're doing the thing that we want them to do. And such as speeding and reckless driving, when we talk about Vision Zero, people have to feel safe on our streets. So we can talk about traffic calming measures, we can talk about speed bumps, but what are we doing in real time to make sure that folks actually do feel safe on our streets, and how we are committing to the plans that we have provided to each one of you around Vision Zero? Like, are we actually doing the things that we say that we're going to do? It's all about commitment and courage and maintaining our commitment to our courage to do what we have already said that we were going to do. That's one. I also think about in terms of speeding and reckless driving, because you asked that so specifically, and I don't drive, y'all know this. I take the bus or I take so if my Lyft is speeding, I'll let them know to not do that. But I fundamentally believe that we really should be moving people and not cars, and getting folks out of cars for a number of reasons, not just because they're dangerous and they really could decrease the number of traffic deaths that we are seeing or injuries in general, but because it's really good for our planet and our environment. And that's the thing that we should be doing. And so coming back to one, auditing what's in place currently and how successful are we, thank you so much, and making sure that those things are successful, and if they're not, to change gears, to change the direction that we're going in. Sorry about that.
Thank you both. So crime, traffic, these are two really important things to Central Park residents. If you set those two things aside, I'd love to hear what your top priority is. It's the thing that you see as the day one, got to get started on it right away thing. And Chantel, you'll go first and you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you what I've heard at the doors thus far. Anytime I've had an opportunity to have a conversation with someone at the door, at a coffee shop or a restaurant, it's often about housing. It's often about it's often about crime, and we've already talked about that one. And so when we talk about priorities, for me, it's figuring out what we can do in the short term to get folks housed. Or to put plans in place to begin to get folks housed. That's a priority. I would be foolish to not say that that's not a priority when it's a city priority and maybe not one that's specific to an individual neighborhood. Many of you all received your property assessments and were maybe not excited about the news that you received in terms of that property assessment. And so when we talk about making sure that folks are housed, it's not just from a homeowner's perspective, but also from a renter's perspective. How are we ensuring that folks have the wages that they need, the transportation that they need, the food or access to quality food and nutrition, access to healthy and clean waters, right? Like those things are all interconnected to me, but I would prioritize housing because that is what I hear most often, all the time, on the doors, in coffee shops, when I'm shopping in Target with my family. People are asking me about my solutions for housing, so housing 100%.
Yes, I agree. Affordable housing, that is the number one thing I hear in the doors, that I hear when I'm talking to voters and everyone in the district. And here's what I'm really excited about, and what I want to hit the ground running on is listening to a lot of the other candidates that are running for city council, the ones running for mayor. I'm really excited about the energy and ideas that people have to bring more affordable housing, both for sale and for rent here. And I think nowhere is that more important than District 8. We have just so much growth and prosperity happening, but also a lot of gentrification and displacement happening as well. So I really believe my first priority is to, once elected, is to do a bunch of town halls and really confirm and talk about what are those ideas, what can we take. And here's the great part. Is when you're sworn in July, that's about midway through the budgeting process for 2024. So that is the time where you can really think about what are those priorities, what are those ideas, and then how do you fight and advocate for those with your fellow city council people, with the mayor, in terms of let's get that on the agenda for the 2024 budget and go put it into action and start running with it. That's things like that I've been talking about this whole time, like community land trusts, expanding down payment assistance. And really just accelerating what can we do to build more affordable housing so we can keep people housed here in District 8. That's what I'm most excited about, and I think that's what everybody expects us to hit the ground running with.
I've watched a lot of city council meetings, and so I know a big part of this job is tied to zoning. And so I want to ask a question about that. Could you describe your philosophy on zoning policy, particularly as it relates to kind of more permissive zoning versus protections for single family neighborhoods? Because that's one of the biggest debates that you see in those hearings. And this question will go to Brad first, and you have 2 minutes.
One of the things I love about District 8 is we have so many different neighborhoods and so many different communities with so many different forms of zoning. Here in Central Park, there are single family homes next to townhomes, next to attached homes, next to small apartment buildings, next to affordable housing, next to big apartment buildings. And as I'm sure you've seen, there's a bunch of giant apartment buildings going up on Central Park Boulevard right now. It must be like something like 2,000 units are going to be soon built around transit-oriented development. So in terms of zoning, and here's the thing, is like, I think obviously Central Park is an expensive place to live. But we also have requirements around, there's also for sale and for rent requirements around buildings. 20% of all rental units need to be affordable, and 10% of all for sale units that are built need to be affordable, restricted. As I think about what we need, I think, from a zoning perspective, is I think you should build more density around transit. And high opportunity zones where there's grocery stores, access to transit and other amenities and things that people need. Because if we're ever going to meet some of our goals around climate change, if we're ever going to solve our traffic issues, we've got to figure out how to co-locate density with areas where you can get around without a car or with a car like stuff. As it relates to neighborhoods that are primarily single family, I don't think it makes sense to drop a giant apartment building in the middle of the block where it's just single family homes. I do think if neighborhoods, this is something I would do as District 8's representatives. I think if communities would like to see, say, a more permissive zoning around ADUs, I'd certainly be supportive of that, but I think you really just got to be careful in terms of how you introduce gentle density into our neighborhoods. But in general, I think we just need to build more density in your transit.
Thank you so much. So I am a proponent of ADUs. I think that is an opportunity for us within our communities to really make a difference and an impact when it comes to getting more folks housed or keeping folks housed. And so when we talk about zoning, I think there's an opportunity there. If you've heard me speak before, you know how important it is for me to not, when we talk about the development of housing, to not concentrate poverty when we do so, when we develop our housing. And the reason that's is because of the issues that many of you have brought up: crime, poverty, safety, things of that nature. And so when we think about zoning and we talk about the development of housing, I think it's so important for us to figure out what are the different mechanisms for us to be able to ensure that we have multi-generational housing, right? That folks have access to, and from the youngest of ages to the oldest of ages, so that those young folks can see what they can actually be, right? And that's why I feel so strongly about not concentrating poverty, but quite frankly, we could solve at least some of our problems if we made a commitment to ADUs and letting folks be able to build on their own properties as homeowners. I'm not quite sure what is meant by protections for single family homes, but if that's like, well, you can tell me because I'm curious. But a protection for a single family home.
More for single family neighborhoods, meaning preserving blocks for traditional single family homes versus tearing them down and building up density in the mix in the middle of a traditional single family home neighborhood. That type of activity.
What a great question. So it's both and, right? Like the conversation is always both and. To have a conversation about how do you make sure that you have multi-generational housing available within cities. I don't think any district should house the majority of your low-income housing or should house the majority of your single family housing or your duplexes. That should be spread across the city in its entirety. You're really good at this job.
I do want to ask one question that doesn't directly impact District 8, but I think is something that we hear just discussed generally, which is downtown Denver and the revitalization of downtown Denver. From your view, is that something that's needed? How would you like to see that? How would you like to see we go about that? And forgive me, I lost track. Chantel, this question's for you, and you can have up to 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. So very important to me as a candidate. And what I know about downtown Denver, I used to work downtown, is that there are 6 businesses closing per day in downtown Denver. That is not just a problem for the council person whose district that downtown that sits within. That's a problem for the entire city. When we talk about economies, I talk about economies and often talk about people, but when we talk about economies, like we have to make sure that our downtowns are actually thriving and that business owners have the resources that they need so that they can stay in business, so that our downtowns are thriving. That's a great source of income for individuals. If it's restaurants, if it's retail, right? Like those are jobs, those potentially, hopefully, are living wage jobs that folks would have access to. So when we talk about the importance of revitalizing downtown or making sure that those businesses are thriving, incredibly important to me.
Yeah, I mean, downtown is important, and there's a lot of people in District 8 that commute to downtown for work. And there's, the stats kind of vary a little bit, but thousands of businesses have left downtown since the pandemic, and it's going to be a struggle to get them back. What I would love to see with downtown in terms of its revitalization is I'd like to see more residential downtown. I think that's how you activate downtown again. So a couple of ideas. One is obviously to convert commercial space that's not going to get tenants back in from a business perspective. Like if you can convert it into residential, let's do it. Let's create more housing downtown. And I think the other really great opportunity that we have is if there's a bunch of empty commercial space, I would love to see more of those commercial buildings converted, at least in part, to childcare facilities, and try to figure out how to solve childcare deserts and some of those resources that we need. And I think that will actually help attract people to work downtown again. Because if you can get childcare close to where you work, I think that's really important. It's something I think about a lot with our opportunities. And then I think the last thing I'll just say is I think we need to figure out how to activate downtown and make it more of a car-free space, but a place where you can actually want to hang out and sit and go to restaurants or hang out with your family and do all those things. I think one of the ways you can do that is maybe close some of those streets to traffic and really activate them. Put in a park, a little parklet, put down benches, put down some activities. I know actually in a couple of weeks, the city is going to be closing down parts of Broadway and making it sort of a car-free street for a Sunday. They took this idea from Mexico City. And so people can walk and bike. Maybe you'll see you down there. But I think that's another opportunity to revitalize downtown. And we really need to revitalize downtown too, because a lot of the tax revenues that come from people living and working and tourists and all those things that help pay for a lot of the things we need in our city. So I think it's really important that we revitalize downtown in really innovative ways.
Thanks. And now a couple of questions that impact all Denverites. The first one's going to be about engaging with Denver Public Schools. And then another one I want to ask about is about the new monthly fee for trash and recycling services. The first one on Denver Public Schools, and Brad, you'll go first. You'll have a couple of minutes again. How do you believe City Council can best engage with DPS and the mayor's administration, the new mayor's administration around education and issues?
Great question. So I think first and foremost, I know they've started to do these again, but obviously City Council and DPS leadership meet on a regular basis. I think we should make sure those continue. On City Council, I think it's just really important to have a lot of knowledge sharing. It's not just about some of the more recent topics that have come up around youth violence. Like it's about how do we better partner on summer jobs, on youth apprenticeships. So I actually, if I could toot my horn for a second, I actually personally negotiated the partnership to do youth apprenticeships with the city and county of Denver. And they made sure to prioritize applicants of students from Nest neighborhoods. And they also provided rapid support. So the Office of Financial Empowerment also helps, for these young people, this might be the first time they're depositing a check or opening a bank account and giving them those life skills to make sure they're set and running with those things. But I really just think we need to collaborate more and have regular conversations. And I think, as it relates to youth violence, Office of Children's Affairs as the something it's I can't pronounce the acronym because it's got too many consonants, but it's the Youth Violence Prevention Action Table. And what that does is really try to foster not only connections between City Council and DPS, but also amongst everybody who has a say in our youth, making sure that we invest. And I think at the end of the day, we want our youth to feel supported and hopeful for their future. And Office of Children's Affairs has a lot of great programs to help support their different after school programs and make sure there's funding for a lot of those things. We just need to make sure we're all working together, we're all rowing the same boat, whether it's around youth violence, we're just connecting and supporting our youth to make sure we're investing in them. So we want them to stay here in Denver and then and thrive.
So I have really strong relationships with current city school board members and administration as well. In fact, the superintendent recently sent me a text message of a photo of him and my mom. My mom works, she's in transportation, so that's kind of maybe where I get my love from transit. But I think it's really important to talk about the silos that we're often operating within from a city perspective, RTD perspective, Denver Public Schools perspective, even from a state perspective, that we're often operating in these silos. And one of the things that Brad mentioned was about the councils, the collaborative councils. And I'm really excited about that opportunity to work in partnership with those leaders who have oversight and authority over Denver Public Schools to figure out what are the gaps, right? What are you all missing when it comes to funding? And I say this as someone who has co-founded a nonprofit, but also has worked in nonprofits. It can be really confusing and difficult to navigate how you partner with the city and how you partner, quite frankly, with Denver Public Schools. And so having folks who are willing to come to the table to figure out how to break down those silos and have conversations about the real issues that are plaguing our communities and even the things that are actually going well, because a lot of the campaign thus far is about all the things that are not going well in our city, but there are some things that are going well, contrary to popular belief. And then finally, I think there's a great opportunity for us to think about how we are not only partnering with Denver Public Schools, but understanding as you're like threading these issues together, that you need to also partner with the regional transportation district, because a lot of the issues from a transportation standpoint impacts our students as well. And our students are trying to figure out, and our families are trying to figure out the solutions, and our institutions are trying to figure out the solutions, but folks aren't having conversations with each other, and so we're not figuring those things out.
Thank you both, and Chantel, you'll go first.
Okay.
This year, the city started to charge the monthly fee for trash recycling services rather than paying for it out of the general fund. I wonder what your view is on this policy change, how it's been rolled out. Then if there's time, you could use this as an example to kind of speak to your view of general fund allocation more broadly.
Yeah, the trash and recycling, as someone who is a homeowner and someone who believes I pay pretty good attention to what's happening in the city, that was one that kind of flew under my radar. And, you know, my grandmother called me and was like, make sure you pay for your trash and your recycling or you're gonna lose your house, you know, because you always lose your house. And so I think that we certainly could have done a better job of rolling that out and working in partnership with communities for that. I'm actually quite concerned that there are a lot of folks who are going to have negative impacts, and there are going to be negative implications to rolling out something where you're needing to pay a bill on a monthly basis just because it's not a behavior that folks have participated in. And it's not a conversation that folks would have been a part of in the design of execution of such program. In terms of general funds, you know, the way that the Denver City Council is currently set up, the mayor creates the budget, right? And then city council approves the budget or makes amendments to the approval of those, makes amendments prior to the approval of those dollars. I would really love to see, as we have a new mayor coming in, to work in partnership with those mayoral folks to say, like, can we be collaborative in that process as opposed to having the mayor create that budgeting process? Like, can that be a more collaborative process so that we are actually looking at a budget from a holistic standpoint and in considering all aspects of the city and the specifics within the different districts as well that you might need versus what someone might need in District 11 or District 10, et cetera, et cetera. And so thank you so much. And so yeah, so I'll stop there. Thanks. It's really good.
I will state that I'm always proud by some miracle every week that trash fits in that small trash can, so cheap bigger ones. So in one sense, I guess it's guided my, changing our behavior a little bit. But here's what I'll say is this is one of the things I hear a lot when I'm out talking to voters is the rollout has not been good on this trash fee. I think even the city would admit that. I think there were certainly good intentions behind what the plan was. But I was just talking to this gentleman right here about, he still hasn't gotten his compost bin that he requested probably like 4 or 5 months ago. And so, for me, I think we need to, one of the things I would be interested in doing is when elected is to just get a status update on how the rollout is going and what can be fixed and changed. Because I know, there's been a lot of errors, there's been a lot of billing issues. And I think this comes amidst a lot of other issues where, everybody just got their property tax assessment. There's a new sidewalk fee. And again, all these things are maybe besides the property tax assessment, like all have good intentions. There are things we need to do. But one thing I worry about is just in general with the cost of living in Denver, is are we taking into account and assessing the impacts of all these new fees and things that are happening? And what are those effects on seniors? What are those effects on people who are already at risk of displacement in District 8? So I would like to see some sense of like, measuring the impact of all these new fees on people and how they're experiencing them. And then, I would like to figure out a way that goes back where it's like, how can we get the general behavior success? It may be too late for the bad thing, but at the very least, one thing I would like to see is if your trash or compost or recycling doesn't get picked up. There is, it doesn't get picked up within 24 hours after they were supposed to. Because maybe you get, a credit or refund, something. I think that improves some additional financial discipline into hopefully getting them to perform better and figure it out. But in general, like again, this is the number one thing I hear, is folks who are saying, like, we just had a lot of really big assessments and other things that have sort of tacked on. And that's one strategy, is to just add a new fee, a new revenue stream. But I think in another sense, like, I remember this debate was happening in city council because I watched the debate. You know, there were a lot of really good questions raised around why can't we just get free composting and figure out how to pay for it out of the general fund. So I think it's something in general we need to think about and come back and just think about how are we balancing all these different fees. I lost my timer, so I don't know if I'm just rambling at this point, but
I think you're out of time.
okay.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, Brad, this will come back to you. You'll have 2 minutes first. I want to circle back to homelessness. For people experiencing homelessness, we've talked about needing to increase affordable housing options. But in a lot of people's eyes, there's kind of an immediate crisis of people on the streets and the issue of unsanctioned encampments. And I want to hear your views on the unsanctioned encampments and what kind of the immediate action items are for that can be addressed on the timeline that a increase in affordable housing is intended to solve for.
This is such a complex challenge. And it's again, when I hear about it on the trail too, is I think I hear from those voters say, like, listen, like we need to figure out a solution that actually solves the root cause of these things. But those are things that are going to take a lot of time. And so, you know, what I always kind of come back to is, you know, I actually, as part of my role on CPUN on our RNO here, you know, I went to go tour one of the first safe outdoor sites, and then wanted to report back to you know, our community and to our RNO. I was incredibly impressed at how fast those have been constructed, how great the outcomes and data had been. And I know we have a safe outdoor space site here in District 8 right now over at Montbello. You know, sometimes their interaction been with some controversy. And so I think, you know, one of my solutions and one ideas is, like, I think we just need to keep expanding that contract with the Colorado Village Collaborative and figuring out how to do more of these safe outdoor sites and just make sure you are doing it with community and their feedback and their ideas. Because I think once they are implemented and once they're used, they have had phenomenal outcomes. They provide a safe space for people to rest and to get connected to services, and they have really good outcomes in terms of getting connected to some of these other more permanent housing. I think there's some interesting ideas that come up. I do think in general, like, we've got to figure out a solution that is compassionate, that treats people with dignity, and provides, you know, until, you know, maybe some of these really good ideas around building more affordable housing, building more permanent supportive housing. We need to figure out ways to connect people to services and care as best we can. And it's just a really complex and challenging issue otherwise.
Unsanctioned encampments, if folks had somewhere to go, that's where they would go. Quite frankly, and what we know from the research is that when we sweep our communities, it's not just harmful to those individuals, but it actually doesn't get us closer to the goal that we intend, which is to get folks housed. When folks are swept from those encampments, oftentimes the things that go with them are their IDs, their birth certificates, things that you actually need to be able to access housing and access services. Some of the things that we tried out at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, that I think you can stand up pretty quickly when you talk about, like, short-term resolutions to housing and homelessness specifically, is being able to take motels and acquiring motels and flipping those into permanent affordable housing. What you'll also hear from folks who work in this space is that nonprofits are not going to be the folks who who are going to solve homelessness. They might be able to help us figure out an aspect of it, but still many of those developments are the concentration of poverty. And so folks might get housed. We don't know if they're staying housed. But it's also causing, it has other effects in terms of, like, crime, safety, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there is an opportunity for us to exhaust every single tool that we have in our toolbox when it comes to housing, when it comes to homelessness, to ensure that we are being as innovative, that we are learning from other cities, that we are putting in place things that actually work, such as the safe outdoor spaces, right? We talk about unsanctioned encampments. Those are safe outdoor spaces that are just not formalized. And so where's the opportunity for us to be more formal in our approach to making sure that folks are taken care of, and that they have the resources that they need to be able to survive, because quite frankly, we get folks housed, and because they don't have the resources that they need, then they end up being unhoused again, and you're perpetuating the problem.
Thank you. All right, we're getting to the end here. A couple more questions. And with this one, I want to try something a little bit different. What I'd like you to do is state what you believe the most clear policy difference between you and your opponent is. And then give you the opportunity to ask your opponent a question yourself. You'll have 1 minute to state what you believe to be that policy difference and ask your question. And then your opponent will have a minute to respond, and then we'll flip. We'll do the reverse. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, Chantel, you are up first. I'll buy you a little time here, Chantel. In your view, what is the most meaningful policy difference between your candidacies?
You know, and Brad and I joked that we've heard each other's stump speech so much that I think we could probably recite them verbatim to one another, and no one would know the difference except for our voices. But Brad has talked a bunch about tackling our toughest problems, and how he had the opportunity to quit his corporate job to be able to tackle our toughest problems. And I fundamentally believe in that. It's so important for me. And I also think that's the difference between Brad and I, is that I actually have always tackled our toughest problems as a way of my job. Like, that's the thing that I do to give back to communities that is investing so deeply in me, and the reason that I'm standing here today. And so co-governance, I think, is one of the largest differences that we have. Is like, I have worked in community to co-govern, to work beside community, to go govern, and to come up with solutions together. My approach is not top down. It's always been bottom up, because I know that that's where the best answers are coming from people who are actually living the lives in which we're trying to find solutions for.
If you have a question, you'd like to ask Brad.
Do you agree? A question for Brad. Brad, you talk quite a bit about community land trust. And so I'm curious as to what it is, how you might be able to, from your city council seat, be able to put forth policies to be able to enact a community land trust.
Great. Well, first, yeah, so I think community land trust, if you're familiar with the model, it's basically acquiring land and existing buildings, potentially too, to actually build affordable housing that's permanently affordable, because you can separate the value of the land from the housing itself. So we actually have several models of this that already exist, including in District 8, and also across the city. So the thing I like about that policy is both from an affordable housing perspective and from a co-governance perspective, is built into that model, is that it's already worked. The city has already provided funding for those things. There's a lot of great nonprofit partners and others that are already doing this. And from a co-governance perspective, community is part of who decides what that looks like, what kind of housing, what kind of amenities. The Facts Partnership right now, District 8, they are actually creating a community land trust based on a couple of motels that they acquired. And in a few years, they're going to start developing what's going to be a lot of affordable housing, but community gets to decide, what do we want on the first floor? There's often a lot of requirements in East Colfax or requests for a library or a rec center or a youth center. And they're going to get to help decide, along with the Facts Partnership, how to decide to do this. So I think it's a model that could not only be used to acquire and build permanently affordable housing that is not subject to the whims of a landlord or the private markets, but it's also something that community gets to say. It's not, just a giant apartment building that goes up and you have no idea. Oh, is it my time? Sorry, I was getting worked up.
But now, Brad, to turn the tables, what do you view as the biggest policy difference between the two of you? And do you have a question for Chantal?
Yeah, I think Chantal and I actually have a lot of the same goals. We just have differences on the means to achieve them. So I have a similar question about affordable housing for you. So you talk a lot about social housing And I think that is a concept that is it has a lot of, basically their federal government is investing a lot of money in facilitating the financing and building of that social housing. Less common here in the United States. I know Seattle has recently passed a ballot measure to start figuring out that process. Can you tell me, as opposed to say a community land trust model where it's already been proven, it's already been put into place here in Denver and actually in District 8, what does social housing look like from the perspective of how do you stand that up and how do you create it, and how long until that could possibly be put into effect here?
Yeah, with great question. So I think it's important for us to talk about community land trusts and like what community land trusts are and are not. I think that's one that's really important, because community land trusts are actually owned by communities, and there's only one example of that in the city and county of Denver. And it's in Globeville, Elyria, Swansea. And so I think that's important to note. The second piece around social housing. I talk about social housing because social housing is actually housing that would be owned by the city and county of Denver, which is different than how we are developing housing currently. There are successful models. Maybe there's not a successful model in the US, but you have to start somewhere. And what we know is that social housing addresses a number of demographics that we might be trying to get housed, from our immigrant and refugee populations, from folks who are in low income, from folks who are even interested in purchasing home, which if you heard me speak, you know that I believe the opportunity to purchase homes as a wealth building opportunity and a tool for displacement. Did good.
Ruth?
Yeah,
Yeah, good.
it's not much, but.
Last question. You two have been at this for quite a long time now, and you've spent a lot of time together. I'm curious if you would share something you've learned from your opponent, something that you would carry with you should you win the election in June. And Brad, you'll go first this time.
I think Chantel's passion for transit is something I'm going to take with me. District 8 over the next few years, we're going to have some really big transit projects happening. There's going to be bus rapid transit on East Colfax. There's a planned bus rapid transit on Colorado Boulevard. And I think it's just so important that, for someone who has spent a lot of, my community involvement time advocating for safe walking and biking throughout Denver, I think transit is another, key element of that too, where, that kind of passion, and that's what's going to connect our neighborhoods and cities and make sure that we get to a future where we've sort of decarbonized transit. And I can think of no more important area and sort of complement to walking and biking. I got you this time. Then just making sure that transit is a key part of that future.
Thank you. So one of the things that Brad talks about often is a community cabinet. And I really appreciate the community cabinet and would probably iterate on the community cabinet to be more issue focused than like a standing community cabinet. But I do think it's an incredible idea. And also Brad is often talking about access to language, access to food, like when it comes to things of that nature, like for folks to be able to gather in this way. And I have a deep appreciation for that. And I know that no matter what the outcome is for this election, that wherever I go or wherever Brad goes, like we're going to be doing and saying these same things. And so no matter what happens, the community is going to be all right. So that's why.
Thank you both. I really appreciate the time you've given us this evening. Some concluding remarks. You have 2 minutes, Brad. The floor is yours.
Thank you all for being here tonight and doing your civic duty again, since we have a runoff here. I really do appreciate that. I'm going to just close with a story. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a death in our family. My wife's family kind of rushed to deal. It was the grandmother. And I'm not going to look at my wife because I'm going to start crying. But I had the girls. I was taking care of the girls this whole time. So I kind of essentially had to put my campaign, so to speak, on pause and stop knocking on doors and going to events. But what I didn't want to do was, I had to figure out how to process my own grief and also try to make sure I didn't lose touch with voters. So I just opened up sort of the voter roll. Sorry if you didn't know this, but campaigns can get everybody's phone number. And I just started calling people. And I wanted to ask, what were their top issues? What are their top concerns? And just maintain some connection while I was, playing dad and husband. And so I think, a lot of what I heard was the issues we talked about tonight. It was about crime. It was about homelessness. It was about affordability and opportunity in District 8 in our city. I think people were also gratified that I called. And what I want to leave you with is, and when I'm elected to District 8, not only is my office going to take your call and take your concerns, your challenges, your ideas, your issues, but we're also going to be reaching out to you to make sure we're doing a good job, to make sure that we are tackling the issues we think are important. And also we just want to reach out, just make sure we're getting that feedback. So it's not like you see me once every couple of weeks or months, but you're actually hearing from us in real time. So I want to say thank you for your engagement today. And thank you to Chantel and Jeff for hosting us here. And really just appreciate the conversation. And I hope I can earn your vote by June 6th. And Brad Rivera running for Denver City Council District 8.
And we'll look at you, Riley. Okay, fair enough, I get it. So there are two pieces of my life that I'm really selfish to share with. And they're my two boys. I have a 1-year-old foster kiddo and a 20-year-old student in college. And I had my son Diego when I was 16 years old. So I was in high school still. And I was a really good mom. I'll just tell y'all that. Being a mom to me was so innate, even at 16, that I was ashamed of it. And I thought that I should not be as good of a mother as I was to Diego because I was so young. And now that I'm older and I'm fostering a kiddo, I've come to recognize that my maternal instinct is actually one of my greatest qualities and assets. And it's not something to be ashamed of. And it's how I lead. I lead from a safe space of love and trust and support. And I'm not shy about being hard on folks and holding them accountable, but I'm also gonna bring you in. And that's my governance. That's how I've led at RTD. That's how I've led at Denver Public Schools. That's how I led my students when we were doing gang reduction work. That is who I am as a person. And I'm very, very maternal. And that's exactly what this city needs, is someone who is willing to mom, right? To birth what we need moving forward within our communities, because we know what's happening right now from an economic standpoint, from a housing standpoint, from a transportation standpoint, from a community violence standpoint, that it's not working. And sometimes you need that maternal, that loving, that nurturing aspect so that thank you so much, that loving aspect in your leadership. And I'm not shy about that. And so I hope that I can earn your support, knowing that that's my greatest asset. You either love your moms or yes, that's okay. Thank you so much. Chantel Lewis running for Denver City Council District 8.
Thank you both very much. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Everyone, the floor is yours. Brad and Chantel will go back to their respective tables. You're welcome to ask any questions, share your thoughts, and you have until about the next 30 minutes or so to do so, 8 o'clock. Thank you all very much.